Hey everybody and welcome to the course. Let's start with our first style, flat. I have previously made a sketch and put it on our artboard. I'm working on an A4 format that I'm later going to adapt to my drawing. What I'm going to do is get the color palette onto our margin. I've selected 5 colors and I added the white as a neutral tone to my palette. Russian signs that we've been looking at before on Pinterest, for example, have been pretty similar when we selected them. It's not just the image though. What we want to represent and what we have in our mind when we put it in the image is also important. Later on, if we want to, we can basically alter the colors that we already have selected from our palette and change the brightness or the contrast to get some new tones with what we have. For now, we're going to work with the ones we have to work, on our composition. What we're going to do is to create a base color, a flat one, that we'll work with the different tonalities that we can give to our drawing so that the drawing makes sense. Now, we have here our swatch palette. What I'm going to do is create a new layer so we can work on it. This will be our base, so I'm not going to edit it. I'll put it on template mode, and this way it'll be automatically blocked. Before, I lowered the opacity, so you can't see the change when I touch the template. So we'll stay with the 2 layers, the swatch layer and the base layer that we have as a template, as I said before. I don't like having to repeat such obvious things. They were Carlotta's words, not mine. Okay, I'm going to create a 3rd layer, which is where we'll position all of the flat and base colors that we'll use on our drawing. I'm going to select a different tone for our layer so that you can see what I'm doing with the pen. After fitting the artboard, we're going to position a square of the same background tone on the layer. This would be the base tone that I'm going to use. I've chosen a dark tone because I feel, it's more representative when we imagine space. I think the sketch layer is pretty clear, so I'm going to increase the opacity so I can see better while I'm working. In the same way, I'm going to lower the opacity of the base because the colors are going to be much more clear, and I need to see the way they look under the lines. If you ever like asking yourselves at any moment how I manage the colors, like with the security I have, you have to know that this hasn't been something I chose randomly. The colors I'm using have been premeditated because before I open Photoshop and I put in the same base I'm working on, all I did was color my palette with colors and swatches I have there, seeing which will be the best composition when I want to work with them. This way, you can take a look at your palette and see more or less what combinations you like more. You just have to test it out with the swatches. If you would like to alter any kind of specific color, or you're looking for something a bit more random, we're going to select our drawing, go to the color wheel, and we'll choose our palette. The wheel will generate automatically a new composition with the new colors. If you like it, you just have to preserve it. If not, it's just a question of testing it to know what you're going to use. It's all a question of practice. Now I'm using the lighter tones. I decided that the moon and some of the constellations with the glass and the fire would have like a turquoise color. This way, the rest of the stars, the fire, and other details are going to stay red, this like light red tone. With the Curvature tool, I'm going to select the ends of the pentagon and I'm going to curve them to the inside to create this star. Quite simple. You do have the star tool as an option. That's in the same window as the square or the ellipse tool. But I'm just trying to use the pen for everything. I'm stubborn. It's what they call me. I was telling you earlier that the flat style is, well, flat. But it depends on the levels of depth you want to give it. It's a word I'm using a lot. Because although you can say, flat, the inclusion of colors has a lot to do with the making of this style. With the pen, I'm making these curves, as we should already know, they're creating anchorage points, stretching, moving the controllers. I'm going to remind you can use A in the case you want to switch, between the types of curve. But the most important thing I had to tell you is it doesn't matter if your line doesn't coincide perfectly with the original sketch, because the most important thing is that you are happy with the results. Obviously, the sketch is something that's more or less a guide. You have to follow it, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to finish the figures that I have left before explaining a little trick that I use when I want a more concrete shape. I'm going to use the Curvature tool so you can see that it can be applied pretty much to anything. And, well, I wanted to tell you that the program has, the capacity to summarize actions that we should develop applying the advantages that these Illustrator tools give us. For example, for this cable that I'm going to do here, I want to make a uniform stroke. So I'll select the pen tool, and instead of making a flat object, I'll use the Pathfinder to create the shape. After adding a considerable thickness with this, I'm going to expand the shape to be able to obtain a solid shape instead of a stroke. In this way, it looks like any other object we have here. I'm going to move this part on and fast forward so it's not too tedious. I'm going to keep adding flat colored shapes throughout the whole illustration to create our base on which we'll work later. You can deactivate and activate the sketch layer as many times as you want, so you don't forget any of the details of the original, fitting it this way in the best way possible to the idea that you have in your mind. As you can see, I'm not following my sketch to the dot. I'm making small changes as I advance, because I think it could look better than in the way I thought at the beginning. If you look carefully, the main tools I'm using for this are the pen and the direct selection tool. One of the tools creates irregular shapes and the other adapts the figures the best it can to the drawing. You can use the arrows on the keyboard to make these movements in a more precise manner. So you've got up, down, left, or right. You don't have to always be using these. The mouse can also move things, but it may move it too much or too little to fit it perfectly into our work of art. As you can see, our image is slowly taking shape. Well, it looks like a dog at least. Okay, now that we have the flat colored base, what we're going to do is make our own palette. We'll get our own tone variations to give the drawing some added richness. It's what I was saying before. Although we have these ones here, what we're going to do is to give it a bit more depth and make it so we can see the different layers, is increase or decrease the saturation and the brightness of the tones that we have to not go outside our palette. I'm going to copy these ellipses that we have here and drag them to one side to be able to work with the variations that I'm talking about. I'm going to apply these changes mostly to the red, blue, and green tones that we have here. The purple and the light green have enough luminosity and contrast next to the white. On the wheel, I'll modify the values, lowering only saturation and luminosity. The most comfortable and advisable things to do is to not add too many variations. I'm going to stay with my wheel open to go back to working on my drawing. If your drawing is oriented towards like a bigger format, it's recommendable to continuously go over it all to make sure there's no small mistakes in the drawing's distribution. I'm going to move on to apply these new colors that we've added to our palette so that you can see just what I mean with volume and depth. Just changing the back legs to like a pinker tone, we can see the perspective that Laika now has. What I'm going to do now is to add lights and shadows to the objects that we have in the illustration. As you can see, they're not very elaborated shadows. They're basically just geometric figures that complement our drawing. The lights and shadows are more a test. What I was saying earlier was that I made the base colors with a lot of determination because I positioned the line art in Photoshop. As you can see in the image we are working on, it's pretty geometrical. It hardly has any major details except for the ellipses. I'm going to continue adding to the illustration a bit. It's just a question of looking at the references we saw before to see if the dog does look like the original or not. The colors are a little bit different, but they're the ones we chose. Little by little, we're getting a result that we can like a bit more. I'm going to remind you that the colors can be changed with the color wheel. Depending on the level of detail that we want to give the drawing, we'll add or subtract the number of shadows and lights on the drawing. Apart from this, I'm going to add a darker tone of red to increase the depth. After having applied our new tone, it's just a question of creating the small details that will complete our drawing. Like, for example, the gaps in the cable that I created with the pen tool, selecting just the path. Sorry. There's not really a need to add anything more. The drawing has enough. Now, for example, we can work on the moon. We're going to be making some craters. And also, we can work on the stars. There's no need for more shading. You can also work with the opacity if you're not super into it. In this case, we're not working on the illustration with any kind of fusion mode. We'll leave that bit for later. Alright, so the only thing left to do is to add the final touches to give a bit more of a spacey look to the scene. Spacey, as in space, not Kevin. To do this, we'll add in some small spheres to work as stars. Then we'll finish the window. We're going to work on Laika too, so that ellipse doesn't stay on her. The tool I'm using right now is the eraser. It's pretty useful, and there isn't much of a mystery to it. All you have to do is select the object, and what you should do is move over it with the eraser. This way, the eraser is going to cut up with the size it has on the surface of the object, and it'll divide it. I'm just adjusting the final touches on the rocket. Okay, like I mentioned before, I'm going to add those spacey details, adding those ellipses to finish the drawing a little more, giving it more of a galaxy look. What we have to do, or what I'm doing in this case, so as not to have to make different ellipses all the time, seeing as this one seems to be the right size to me, is to press Alt, select the object we're working on, and drag it. It depends on how we want to develop the rest of the objects now, or if we want to change their size, creating different figures. In this lesson, we've seen the creation through different steps of a flat style. If you liked it, I hope you go on to apply the theory of flat colors onto your own illustrations and that you can have some fun with this style. I'll see you again in the next lesson, the comic style. The secret's in the practice, so let's get to it. See you guys later. Bye.